What is up, worship leaders? My name is Dalton Schaefer. Welcome back to the Spirit Truth Worship Podcast. Today, I've got a guest. I'm really excited for a conversation we're going to have around raising up worship leaders in your ministry, Equipped Worship. Ross Fishburn from Equipped Worship. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing awesome. Doing great, man. It's a sunny day here in Waco, Texas. So thanks
Come
for having
on.
me on.
Man, we've got a nice rainy, cold Iowa day, so it's not
Oh,
quite the same, but I'll take it. It's better than snow, which is what we've had for
that's right.
basically 3 or 4 months straight. So cool. Well, hey, I would love it if maybe for someone who doesn't know, I kind of know where you've just come from in ministry, but would you just explain for anybody listening kind of what you're doing now with Equipped Worship and how you got there and kind of what you were doing before this?
Yeah. Thanks again for having me on, Dalton.
Oh.
Dalton and I go kind of way back. I mean, Dalton's been sort of in the worship initiative circle. I assume a subscriber, but at least a follower on social media. And
Yeah.
I used to work for the worship initiative. I worked there 6 years. Traveled in Shane and Shane's band, still playing with them as much as I can. But for 6 years, I mean, when I started, the worship initiative was two or three of us just kind of wearing all the hats in the organization and creating as much content to encourage worship leaders online and as much music as we could that would be inspiring for worship leaders to listen to and to replicate in their services. And so I did that for 6 years. And wow, God has been so gracious and patient with me. I started feeling stirred. I don't know, man. It's probably a year or two ago where I just felt a stirring for something different, and I wasn't sure if God was calling me back into vocational ministry or if it was something else. And all I knew was I had a desire to equip leaders, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry in a relational format. Not so much a virtual subscription thing. That's not our format or our vision, although it's impactful. Like what the worship initiative is doing is impacting so many. I just know. But for me, I just felt compelled the way that I'm wired and gifted to sit across a table or across a virtual meeting with someone and hear their story, their context, and develop a personalized plan where I could take everything that I've experienced and the ministry context that I've been a part of over the last almost 20 years and pour into worship leaders who might feel ill-equipped or haven't had formal training, or maybe they're just inexperienced. And so over the last year and a half, 2 years, all of that stirring has turned into what we're talking about today, equipworship.com. So, yeah, man.
Wow. That's awesome. Well, I just want to say, I've been in kind of that worship initiative circle, basically from the very beginning. As soon as it kind of came out and I learned about it, I jumped on back when, I think it was like very first being rolled out. There were only a couple volumes of like songs that had been released.
Oh, wow.
And so I actually jumped in as I was a pretty young believer. I was brand new to leading worship. And I went through it to learn how to play acoustic guitar in a worship context and how to sing. I did like the vocal lessons. And then since then have used it for like learning piano, to how to do worship piano and electric guitar. And
wow,
I've actually gone through like almost every track that you can take. And so we then now use it for a whole, we pay for like a ton of subscriptions for our church so that we can use it to do basically all of our development and craft training at our church through the worship initiative.
Oh my
so
gosh.
I really believe in the work that you guys have done through that. It's been personally impactful. But then now I've seen it be used over the course of like the last 6 years to impact a lot of other people too. So really believe in that. And which is why I was pretty excited to then hear what you're doing with Equipped Worship, because it's like, man, it's even that next level deeper of like more relational growth among worship leaders that maybe some of the stuff you can't really do. And just like what you said, like a subscription based, like videos, that's great for certain things. But what you guys are doing is a little bit more unique than that. And so I'd love to hear just a little bit about, just kind of like what could someone expect to like learn and grow from if they were to like sign up for Equipped Worship?
Yeah, well, it's the format of the program is 3, 6, or 9 months, and And 3 month is kind of an accelerated version of the 9 month, but basically we in the 6 and 9 month we dive deeper into biblical mission and model of worship, and we kind of
Okay.
get into the nitty gritty of all things leadership and ministry. So musicality, technicality, the
Yep.
technical side of things, leadership, communication, biblical mission and model of worship. We review rehearsals and
Yeah, that's awesome.
review services just to give objective feedback. If someone says, man, I have no idea if this is terrible or if we're doing anything right, or I just need someone to give objective feedback, we offer that as a part of the plans. But yeah, man, we do additional services as well, on-site workshops. So if you would say,
Oh, wow.
man, I think what would be helpful is, instead of going to a conference this year, we invite an equip coach or someone who has experience to come into
Yeah.
our space and work specifically with our band, with our musicians' hands on their instruments and working through a workshop. We do that, and then we do song production too. So if you're a church that's like, man, we write songs and we've always wanted a way to record these songs, but we can't afford the $5,000 a song producer. What I'm just throwing a number out there. I don't know if it's that for everyone, but you know what I mean. It's an affordable way to produce songs that could be a gift to the body, and so we're doing that too. But yeah, man. In terms of our curriculum, man, we cover, and I know we're going to talk about this, but the office of the worship leader, the quote unquote office, and what the Bible has to say about that, worship set and rehearsal review. We hope to help leaders become more self-aware, and so we provide proven assessments like the IEQ-9 leadership personality test that Enneagram uses, just to help leaders become more self-aware about their own shortcomings, their strengths, their weaknesses, and then we'll cover things like a volunteer development pipeline.
Wow. Yeah,
you might
that's
say,
awesome.
what is that? But basically, how do you recruit or see potential in musicians and leaders and onboard them and give them feedback and deploy them for the work of the ministry? So we'll cover things like that. And I mean, as many things as we can cover, it's a personalized work and development plan is the language we're using, where we'll cover the ministry context and the needs of the ministry, and then put together a work and development plan that is personalized and tailor-made for that individual just to help them grow.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. I love hearing that. That is a big part. I serve in a church planting network where I think every worship leader in our network is trying to figure out how we can better raise up and send out worship leaders. And so I think what you're doing is like going to serve the church in such a huge way. And so, yeah, I love hearing about all that. I would love to take a moment to dig in a little bit more into the office of the worship leader, because I think it's so interesting that you could like search through the Bible and you're not going to see like, in some we're given to be like teachers and pastors and shepherds and worship, like it's just not in there. And yet the Bible has so much to say for those of us who now do serve in that particular way in our churches. And so I'd love to hear you just dig in for a few minutes on kind of your view of the office of worship leader, how you've seen that develop, and like maybe even where you think that office is going in the church today. Like I'd just love to open that up and talk about it for a little bit.
Yeah, man. I mean, I would say this is the reason for equipped worship right here, this conversation. Man, we led an internship, myself, Shane and Shane, Clayton, some others on our staff years ago at the church that we all attended together. And we started this school of leadership, and it was a worship internship, and there were probably 30 or 40 students in our worship internship, and we were a little in over our heads. I think we didn't realize that many folks would show up to this.
That's awesome.
But people from all over the country came to this thing, and man, you know what? We just found we learned so much through that. And then fast forward over the next 15 years of worship ministry and leadership and working at the Worship Initiative together, myself and the Shanes, and just having these conversations has really opened our eyes to, man, what does the Bible really say about the role of the worship leader? What's the Bible say about the office of the worship leader, if anything?
Yeah.
And what I've come to find out is it doesn't say much. What it does say, there are moments like there's the Song of Moses in Exodus that we can point to where God gave him a song and he wrote the song down and then he taught it to the Israelites as a reminder of what God said would happen,
Yep.
And God was actually reprimanding his people through the song, which is a whole nother conversation. But
we need more songs like that.
Yeah, we do. We probably do. Yeah. We probably do more admonishment. But so there are points throughout Scripture where David soothes King Saul with his music, and the evil spirit. He drives away the evil spirits from Saul, and that's why Saul brings King David. He wasn't king then, but David into his courts was to soothe and get, remove the evil spirits from his presence, and then obviously David, songwriter, man after God's own heart. Like there are all of these sort of nods to worship ministry, but nothing explicit in terms of the office and the role of the worship leader. And so what we're passionate about and kind of where Equipped was derived from was Ephesians 4, and you alluded to it earlier. But Ephesians 4:11, the command is given. So Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and teachers to equip his people for works of service, so the body of Christ may be built up. Well, the office of worship leader isn't in there. And so my hope through this program and platform is that I can encourage the leader to think deeply about their role. To circle back, what I learned in the early years running this internship with the Shanes and Clayton was, and still to this day, it's true, especially in the digital age that we live in, where we're gathering all this information from YouTube and all the things, is we're constantly comparing ourselves. And I think there's just a massive unhealth. There's a damaging element to the comparison game that we have going on whenever we, and it may be unconscious. Like maybe we flip on YouTube and we work, or we're doing dishes or laundry or whatever, and we're just listening. And then we put our in-ears in on Sunday morning and it sounds awful, or whatever. And so we're constantly comparing, and we're always trying to get better and grow and look for resources, do all this thing. When God is just saying, man, are you an apostle, prophet, pastor, teacher, evangelist? Let's start there. And then let's make music secondary, and let's major on the right things. So for example, like Colossians 3:16 is another staple scripture in the New Testament that talks about singing, that says, let the message of Christ dwell among you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom through singing songs from the Spirit, singing to God with gratitude in your heart. So there's this model of singing together, but there really isn't, at least that I've found, help me, maybe I'm wrong, but I haven't found anything that is explicit in the New Testament about a worship leader leading others in a time of singing. It talks about singing together, but not this role, this office of the worship leader.
No. There's an almost passage. This is kind of a joke. But in Hebrews 2, Jesus is the worship leader who
Jesus
proclaims
is the
name
leader.
of God. He's proclaiming, and he calls us his brothers and sisters. I'll proclaim your name among my brothers and sisters in the congregation. That's a powerful text.
Yes.
But even more so, we'll say like we're actually not the ultimate worship leader. Jesus is. And so, but no, you're totally right. There's no text. We get like a few texts about singing in like Ephesians 5. This is kind of my whole thing, right? It's like Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly, or the message of Christ. And then Ephesians 5 says, and be filled with the Spirit as you address one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. Like we get these awesome passages about addressing one another in songs, but yeah, no office of worship leader, no like set aside, person. And so what is that? How do we then interpret like the role?
And so, one of my good buddies, he's actually my pastor. We've been attending church in Dallas called All Saints Anglican Church, and it's just been such a gift to us. But one of the priests there, his name's Jay Wright, Dr. Jay Wright, and he wrote a blog recently that anyone listening can check out, adequateworship.com, about the role of the worship leader. And he alludes to this and helps give some framework for how the modern worship leader came to be and how it evolved.
Oh, wow.
And one thing that he says in there is the role of worship leaders evolved over the span of 2,000 years and longer if you consider the Jewish roots of Christian worship. What began as a chanter and became a choir leader would morph into organist and then song leader. Finally, the evolution has arrived at what many American churches have today, a worship leader. And the current model, God, whoever's listening, the current model of worship leader began in 1960. Like we are only talking about 60 years of this kind of person on a mic with a guitar or piano leading people with a band behind them. Yeah. That kind of structure is just in its infancy. And so, but with all of that said, I don't think it's unbiblical at all. That's not what we're saying. It could be extra biblical. But the hope is that we help worship leaders be grounded and think deeply about their role as pastor, prophet, teacher, evangelist, apostle.
Yeah, that's
and
good.
No matter what the model has looked like, there's always been a singular goal, and that's to facilitate the sung prayer of God's people. And so, what does that look like for your ministry context? Because chances are we don't need another Hillsong in Ames, Iowa, or in Waco, Texas, or wherever you are. We don't need to just replicate identically exactly what Hillsong or Passion or Bethel are doing, even though they're doing great things. And I love the songs coming out of there and all of that. We can go on and on about that. But what is God asking you to do in your ministry context? And how does that look like methodologically, being informed and rooted in what the New Testament has to say about that role?
Yeah, dude, that is so good. Like that was worth the price of admission on this. If someone's watching this, like that was gold. Yeah, I think that was super helpful. And if you're watching this and you want to go deeper on that, you should definitely consider signing up for Equipped Worship. Going like checking out all the blogs and stuff that have been written. But that would be a great resource to, I think, start taking some of those steps. And I want to like continue is because you guys, I don't know how many people are involved in your ministry, but there's a variety of coaches, and you guys kind of have a pulse on, I would assume, like a multitude of different ministries and kind of what's happening in the broader worship culture, especially with your role with the Shanes and Worship Initiative. You kind of gotten to see that. What would you say is like one or two trends in the modern worship culture over the last few years that you are really encouraged by?
In the modern worship culture, man, this is such a great question. You didn't prepare me for this question, Dalton. Well, you kind of did. I lied, but it was right before we got on.
2 seconds before we hit record, I said, "In heads up, I'm going to ask this."
Man, I would say, like, in a healthy way, like, there's just so many great songs to sing. Yeah. And that's just I think that's such a positive thing. Like, maybe where 25 years ago we had the latest Integrity album or Maranatha Praise album or whatever came out, and the song choices, the song landscape was smaller and maybe more limited than it is today. And there are just so many awesome songs to choose from. I think I'm encouraged by that. I am encouraged by all the conversations that are happening. It's a give and take. It's a positive and a negative thing. Like there's so many. I'll just stick with the positive. I'm just encouraged by the online platforms and what Dalton's doing with Spirit Truth and in all of the different mediums that are being used to communicate God's gospel. And that are seeking to really build up the body of Christ. That's good. This just wasn't possible 30 years ago. It just wasn't possible. You had to go to your local Christian bookstore and buy the cassette tape or whatever to listen to sermons or to listen to Paul Balash talk about worship ministry or Phil Wickham or whoever, Shane, whoever it is. And now we have access to all of these people who have decades of ministry experience. And so I'm encouraged by that as well.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's huge. Yeah, I was talking to someone the other day just about the gift that, man, we do have access. Like, could you imagine trying to do some of the things we do today, but no internet and no ability to just instantly get the resources you need and the equipping you need. And it's a real gift that I just don't want to take for granted that the Lord has put us in an age where it's easier to get theological education than it's ever been. We actually have more resources to be better equipped than in any age in church history. It would be a shame if we didn't take advantage of that to be the most equipped generation of worship leaders to go and continue to be faithful to all that God's called us to. And so the flip side of that question though would be, what's one or two trends that you've seen as you kind of have a pulse on different things that maybe have been more discouraging among worship leaders and in the worship culture today?
Man, I just think it's really the hardest time, the most difficult, challenging time in history to hear God's voice clearly. And what I mean by that is it's kind of the opposite side of the coin of what we just talked about, but there are so many voices and so many resources and so many songs being written, and this pressure, I think, on the worship leader to create the most hip, dynamic, professional, excellent worship set possible.
Yeah.
When God isn't asking us to do any of those things. And so I think the struggle, the tension is pushing back on the lights and the fog and the sexiness of commercialized Christian music and worship culture, and really hearing God's voice and God's spirit for your local context and your ministry context. It's just really easy if you follow 50 worship leaders who are professional at what they do to think, man, that's so inspiring. I need to be doing that, or I really want to do that for our congregation. When, man, maybe that's not what God is asking you to do. That would be my tension that I'm having, is just the everything is it can quickly be commercialized and replicated with this day and age and the internet and YouTube and how good everything sounds when you hear it in your ears coming off YouTube or in your car speakers. There's just a real temptation to major on the minors instead of focusing on real ministry work. So that would be my tension. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm
it totally
communicating
does.
it well.
No, I think that resonates with me on a personal level. Like anybody who like follows this podcast knows that there was recently 5 months of me stopping all YouTube videos, all podcasts, for two reasons. One, it was in a time of prayer. The Lord spoke to my heart and said, I'm going to ask you to set this down for a while. And two, at the same time, he's asking me to go deeper in with my local church and to give all of my energy and attention to serving a very particular set of people who are like right in front of me in flesh and bone that actually needed more of my time, energy, and attention than like whatever's out here on podcast world and YouTube and videos and kind of all of the influencer stuff. And like that was actually something that I needed to just like set aside to focus in on my own local church. So I think there's a real temptation to see other worship leaders who maybe God has blessed their ministry and think, one, it's like, oh man, I should be doing that, or that's what success looks like. I think there's also just like maybe a deeper rooted sin issue of just like wanting to make a name for ourselves and not trusting the Lord with your ministry. And so that's like for my own heart, like I'm not like trying to anybody listen to this. I'm not saying that that's you, but like I think it's worth like surveying our hearts every once in a while and go, why do I get on stage and lead songs? Is it because I want to see Christ exalted and his spirit do a work among us and people transformed, and we all with unveiled faces beholding the glory of the Lord are being transformed into his image, one degree of glory to the next? Or is it because I love the feeling I get when I walk off stage and someone says, you sounded awesome, that was really powerful? And I just think it's like, man, there will always be that tension. I don't think we're going to get to the point this side of heaven where we have totally 100% pure motives, especially when we're always fighting the microphone and the spotlight and the platform. But I think that it's something that if we aren't like keeping in check and being aware of, that can very easily, you look up one day and you go, dude, I just spent 10 years like chasing after my own name. And I hope that doesn't ever happen to me. And I felt like there are these moments where the Lord just in his kindness reminds me, it's like, hey, you could set down everything else you're doing and just seek after me. And that will actually be enough to fulfill all those other things that you're trying to chase. And so, yeah, I love that though. I thought, yeah, that was super good.
That is gold, Dalton. Dude, I have goosebumps right now. You just preached to me, bro. That is good, man.
Well, no, I feel the same way just hearing you talk.
Dude. Just last thing on that, my prayer for folks leading worship is really ask God for discernment to make the distinction between is this a concert for me to enjoy, or is this a worship leadership resource that I should use to equip others for the work of the ministry in my local body? Pray for discernment and ask God, because that makes it sound like the Christian artist who plays concerts is evil or something. That's not what I'm saying. But that's what I would say. Like, just ask God for discernment. What am I supposed to take away from this for me and my local body?
Yeah, no, I love that. I wanted one more question before we kind of wrap things up. What would you say is like maybe just one or two of the most common areas of growth that as you're getting worship leader, and maybe they're all different, it's hard to pick, but would you say there's any like one or two areas that you're consistently seeing among worship leaders that is an area that just maybe it would speak to a broader category of people listening to this that are like, hey, if you're not thinking about this area of your ministry, you might actually be missing something really critical. I don't know if anything comes to mind.
Well, we talked a little bit about it. I would just say, like, really consider what the Word of God, what the Bible has to say about your role, and think deeply about your role as a minister beyond music. I think that grounds us as artists and worship leaders and artsy folks who just want to make beautiful things. I think it grounds us, and so I would say just like, Maybe if there's a form of accountability with someone on your staff or your team or a friend or a ministry partner, just maybe loop them into your life and just say, man, how can we work together on seeking what God's holy word and holy scriptures say about the role of the minister? And I think that alone will provide so much growth and development in the minister's life. Man, other than that, gosh, I think that's what matters the most, in terms of like the more, like the subtopics. I'm just trying to think, like, I think what trips people up oftentimes, maybe from a musical standpoint, is the worship leader just doesn't know how to speak the language of the musicians on the stage. And so you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot oftentimes because you just don't know what to say to the drummer when they're doing their thing. And so you just kind of like, hey, can you, instead of doing what you just did, can you just do this? You know, and you just like air drum or you
beatbox.
Yeah. So there's, I think just like, I think most worship leaders struggle with one of those two categories, like staying biblically grounded on their role as minister, or like being able to speak the musical language. It's like they fall into one of those two They either lean one way or the other, right? It seems at least in my experience.
Totally.
And I've felt that way myself, where I'm like, man, I'm totally ill-equipped biblically. I've had those seasons. Or, man, I'm totally ill-equipped musically. I need to learn more about the keys player and their sounds and their layers, and I need to learn more about main stage so I can speak the language to the keys player, for example. So, I would just say, the last thing I'll say, Dalton, is the unicorn doesn't exist. So lead pastors are always looking for unicorns, and they don't exist. And so you're either going to be like crazy strong in the artistic performance area, or crazy, crazy strong in the management, organizational management, building teams area, and maybe you're not as gifted vocally or something. The unicorn, I've never seen a unicorn. Have you seen a unicorn, Dalton?
I've never seen a unicorn.
My 7-year-old and my 3-year-old girls, they've both seen unicorns, but I've never seen a unicorn.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's all I would say. I think that makes sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah, I absolutely see the same tension of you lean towards the music stuff, you lean towards more of the shepherding leader, the management side. I would say those are both
and that's
areas.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's good. Like, it's actually like good. And you could probably find other people in your team who lean a different way that can actually like counterbalance your own strengths and weaknesses. And I'll just say those were both two areas when I first started leading worship that I was totally under-equipped for and terrified of. And one of those things, I went to the worship initiative and started learning how to play every other instrument on the team so I could tell my team, like, it's like, I don't want to ask you to do something that I'm unable to do. So I usually I'm like, if I can figure out how to play it, I can probably help a keys player who's better than me also figure out how to play it and know like kind of how to speak to them and learn some of the 4 on the floor drum language, or, you know, different kinds of drum grooves. And so I'm not a great drummer, but I can now kind of speak the language and talk about the syncopation. And I was a music major in college, so I have a lot of the music stuff, but a lot of our worship teams, like, you can tell them that it's like a dotted 8/16. They actually might not know what that means because they don't have formal music training. So like even learning to take like a music degree and then translate it. But then on the other side, I also took a class from Austin Stone. They used to offer this thing called Foundations, and it was like all shepherding, theological. So it was kind of like I was getting like craft training and like theological and shepherding training on one side. But it was like, I was like, okay, if I was supposed to lean one way, I'm not even sure I leaned either way. I was right in the middle and bad at both. and I just needed to grow. And so I just went all in on trying to find both of those areas to grow in. So yeah, if you're listening to this, I would just say admitting that you have a weakness is actually an advantage, because as soon as you know what you're weak in, you can start growing in it. And so don't like try to convince yourself that you actually don't need to grow in one of those areas, and just start chasing down the areas that you think you're not as gifted in. And as we kind of close, I just want to bring attention, because one of the things you have a checklist, a free downloadable checklist for worship leaders to download, and I got it earlier and was going through it, and actually a lot of the stuff we're talking about right now, you had just some great encouragements in it. One of the things was like, learn all of the parts of your vocalist and band, because someone will come unprepared to your rehearsal and you can be ready to teach them. And I was just like, that is so good. Like, to think on that level of like, hey, why don't you actually learn all the harmony parts, and like, so that when your vocalist inevitably doesn't totally know their part, which is okay because they're volunteers and they don't have 40 hours a week to think about this, you're actually ready to say, hey, like, this is how it goes, or I just thought that was super helpful. And there were a bunch of other stuff, like some reminders as well as some really practical things. And so if you're watching this, like go to Equipped Worship. It's on there. I know it's linked in y'all's bio for your Instagram right now. And so yeah, I would just go check that out. And then for anybody listening who maybe serves at a church plant, you guys offer a deal for church plants. You said it's 30% off, I think, which is just huge. Off. And so is that just for church? Like, what do you consider a church plant? Like, how would someone go about applying for that and getting that discount?
It depends on your situation, but typically under 150 members and cool. You're less than 2 years old.
Cool.
You know,
sweet.
So yep. To answer your question.
Yeah, man. Well, I'll just close this out here with a couple of rapid fire questions. If you were to go to a coffee shop right now, what's your go-to order?
Ooh. Hey man, I'm okay with Starbucks usually. So all you hipster kids, you're gonna be like, ooh, he likes Starbucks. But the oat milk shaken, brown sugar oat milk shaken espresso, iced, is like oatmeal in a cup, man. It is sweet. Delicious.
I have never heard of that, but it sounds awesome. Oh, wow, that's great. What is your favorite worship song to play or lead right now?
Oh man. I get juiced up all over when I play Christ Be Magnified by Cody Carnes.
Nice. Yeah, that's a great song. What line in the bridge do you sing? You can hang me there with you, or I'll be crucified with you.
I'll be crucified with you.
That's what I prefer to. When I got to my current church, though, they said you can hang me there with you, and I was like, strong. Can I go back? They're both good. I was like, I say
I don't disagree. I don't disagree with it or anything. Yeah, no. It's just strong. It's explicit.
Yeah. I just let it so many times that I could not get it right. It was like ingrained to sing it the wrong way.
That chorus is incredible, man. It inspires more worship in me. So I love it.
Yeah, love it. Well, cool. Well, hey, that's all I've got. Thank you so much for coming on, Ross. This was a joy. Really love getting to connect more and hear about what you guys are doing. And hopefully, if anybody's listening to this and they want to jump on, they can. What's y'all's URL for your website?
www.equippedworship.com.
Sweet. Yeah, so go check that out. Y'all have lots of resources available. Like the blogs and stuff you're doing, as well as on Instagram. You can follow them. They're posting some awesome stuff. And so if you found this helpful, you could like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and rate the podcast wherever you listen to your podcast. And we will hopefully see you in the next video. Thank you guys for listening.